A aposta ousada da Xiaomi no mercado de veículos elétricos, SU7 versus Tesla. Descubra a entrada ambiciosa da Xiaomi no mercado de veículos elétricos com o SU7 e seu desafio à Tesla.
All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty exciting, the world of electric vehicles, but we're going to be focusing on one company in particular. We're talking Xiaomi.
Yeah.
You probably know them for their smartphones.
Right.
But they've made a pretty audacious move to challenge, the big guy, Tesla, with their new EV, the SU7.
It is a bold move, yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're really going to unpack, what is Xiaomi's strategy here? What kind of early successes have they had? And what's the landscape like in terms of, we're going to talk about government support in China, trade barriers internationally, really kind of get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
And we've got some really great sources to help us understand all of this. We've got a whole bunch of business publications, some industry analysis, even some driving reviews, just to kind of give us that, on-the-ground feel for what's going on.
Yeah, the SU7 is a really interesting car.
Yeah, so let's start there. Let's start with the SU7 itself. What can you tell us about this car?
Well, the SU7 is their first foray into the EV market, right? Yeah. They launched it in March 2024, and it's a sedan. It's designed to really go head-to-head with the Tesla Model 3.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things that they did is that they priced it really aggressively. So in China, the SU7 starts at around $29,874.
Wow.
Versus the Model 3, which is about $33,874.
So that's a pretty significant difference, especially for these consumers who are really price conscious. But is it just a, budget alternative to a Tesla? Or does it have anything else going for it? What are we talking about here?
Right.
Feature-wise?
No, it's got some impressive features. One thing it boasts a 435-mile starting range, which is actually higher than the long-range Model 3.
Really?
Yeah. So, and then you remember the launch event where they had over 50,000 orders in 27 minutes?
Oh yeah, that was huge. It seemed like everyone was talking about that.
It wasn't just consumers that took notice. CEOs from other rival Chinese EV makers like XPeng, NIO, Li Auto were all spotted at the launch event. So it was pretty clear that they saw Xiaomi as a legitimate threat.
Wow. So, they had the buzz, but did they deliver? What have the sales figures actually been looking like since that launch?
This is where it gets really interesting. So from April 2024 to January 2025, the SU7 actually outsold the Tesla Model 3 in China.
No way.
Yeah. We're talking 162,384 SU7s sold versus 152,748 Model 3s. And that's even after China phased out those direct purchase subsidies for EVs back in 2022.
Wow. So to outsell a giant like Tesla without the boost of those subsidies, that's pretty incredible.
It is.
Especially for a newcomer to the market.
And they're aiming even higher.
Yeah.
They want to sell over 300,000 cars in 2025, and they're also going to launch a crossover SUV, the YU7, which is going to compete directly with the Tesla Model Y. So they're clearly not shying away from any challenges here.
So it sounds like they're really going all in. But you mentioned, China ending those direct subsidies for EVs. Does that mean that the government's not supporting the industry anymore?
Well, no, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
It's just the direct purchase subsidies are gone. The Chinese government is still very heavily involved in supporting its EV industry, just in more indirect ways,
Oh, okay.
So, for example, they've exempted EVs from that 10% vehicle purchase tax until 2027.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a pretty significant cost saving for buyers.
It's a huge cost saving.
Right.
And then they also have something called the dual credit scheme.
Sure.
And this is kind of like a reward system for car makers. So for every new energy vehicle, which includes EVs that they produce, they earn credits. So it's incentivizing them to just make more cleaner vehicles.
So they're still incentivizing, the production and sale of EVs. It's just not as direct as it was before.
Exactly. And you can actually see this playing out with another Chinese EV maker, BYD, which has been quite successful. They're profitable.
Yeah.
But they're still getting a lot of government support. So their annual reports show that they received a total of $3.4 billion in direct subsidies between 2018 and 2022.
Wow.
And a big chunk of that came in 2022.
So even the established players are still getting some help, huh?
Oh, yeah.
It kind of makes you wonder, how much of this success is truly organic and how much of it's being artificially inflated by government intervention?
It's a great question, and it actually leads us to the next layer of complexity in this whole story, which is the global landscape.
Right.
Because while China is, very actively supporting their EV industry, the international scene is a bit more contentious.
Oh, yeah. Those trade wars. We got to talk about that. It seems like everyone's trying to protect their own industries, and that just makes things like so much more difficult for companies like Xiaomi that are trying to, expand globally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real tug of war. We've seen the US, the EU, and Canada. They've all kind of ganged up, haven't they? Put some pretty big trade barriers up, specifically targeting these Chinese EVs.
Yeah. I mean, they're not being subtle about it. I mean, the U.S., they put a 100% tariff on any Chinese-made EVs back in May 2024.
Right. And then the EU, they decided to pile on as well. They put provisional anti-subsidy tariffs up to 37.6% on Chinese EVs, and that was July 2024.
Yeah.
But that was after an investigation. They started it way back in October 2023.
Wow.
And then Canada, just to round it out, they raised their tariffs to 100% as well, August 2024. So it's a lot.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Everyone's pushing for, a greener future, but then these protectionist measures, they seem to be like really hindering the global adoption of electric vehicles.
Yeah. I mean, even Elon Musk, Mr. Tesla himself, he's been critical of these tariffs because he's saying that it could slow down the transition to sustainable transportation.
Oh.
I mean, you have to ask yourself, what's really going on here? Are they genuinely concerned about these domestic industries, or is it, something else, trying to stifle the competition?
Yeah, I mean, are there legitimate concerns about unfair competition from China? Or is this really just an attempt to kind of keep them down, keep them from getting too big?
I think there are arguments on both sides, honestly. I mean, some would say that the heavy government subsidies in China, they create an unfair advantage, right? So Chinese companies can undercut the competition and flood the market with these cheaper EVs.
Right. Yeah.
Others would say, well, look, these measures are really important to help grow a new industry, and these tariffs are just protectionist moves.
Yeah.
They're designed to shield their domestic automakers from real competition.
It's complicated. It's like really a nuanced issue. And obviously China's not just sitting there taking it, right?
Mm-hmm. No, they're fighting back.
Yeah.
They've started anti-dumping investigations of their own, and they're considering using this anti-discrimination instrument, I think for the first time, actually, as a response to these tariffs. It's like a high-stakes game of chess, isn't it, playing out on this global stage?
It really is. So how does Xiaomi fit into all of this? I mean, they've had this early success in China, but can they really replicate that on a global scale when they've got these trade barriers in place?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, we know that their president, William Liu, has said publicly that they're gonna sell EVs globally within the next few years, starting with they're gonna launch the SU7 Ultra.
Okay, so they're not backing down.
No. But I think they're going to face some serious hurdles, right? I mean, just setting up your sales and service networks in these new markets, it's not easy. And then you've got to consider, the whole charging infrastructure, different countries, they have different regulations, different networks in place. I mean, how are they going to compete with, Tesla's supercharger network? That's a huge advantage.
Yeah, that is. It's one thing to sell a car, but if people can't charge it easily, it's a deal breaker.
Oh, absolutely. And then they're also going up against these established automakers who've been doing this for decades. They know how to navigate international markets. I mean, it's really kind of a David and Goliath situation in some ways.
Yeah, it is. So we've talked about a lot here. I mean, we've seen Xiaomi's just meteoric rise in China with the SU7. They've had government support, but now they've got to face this really complex web of international trade barriers, and the competition is just fierce, as they try to expand globally.
It's a fascinating case study, isn't it? I mean, it shows you the challenges and opportunities in this EV market.
Yeah,
that's just changing so rapidly.
It really is. So I want to take a step back for a minute though and think about the bigger picture here. What does all this mean for the future of EVs, do you think?
Well, I think it shows that the switch to electric mobility, it's not if anymore, it's when and how.
Right.
And it's happening globally. Governments are putting money into infrastructure. Companies are all fighting for market share. Consumers they're buying electric vehicles. It's happening. But I think it also shows you the challenges that come with this transition. Like we were just talking about, you've got geopolitical tensions, playing out in economics, this whole debate about government intervention versus a free market. It's a hot topic.
Yeah, it's a It's a really complicated landscape, and I'm just really fascinated to see how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, it's a huge question. And they've shown, like, they're ambitious and they can move quickly, but going global with everything that entails, I mean, that's a whole other, ball game.
Oh, it is. It is. And the stakes are so high right now. I mean, the EV market is changing so fast. New technologies are coming out all the time. Battery innovations are accelerating, and you've got like the established automakers, they're pouring tons of resources into EVs. It's a really dynamic and competitive environment.
And you can't forget, we talked about the geopolitics, right? The trade wars, the whole push for countries to be self-reliant, this race for resources, it's all kind of happening in the background, and that's shaping the decisions that governments and companies are making. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's the consumers, isn't it? They're the ones that are going to decide who wins and loses here. Can Xiaomi capture the imagination of buyers outside of China? Can they build a brand that really resonates with global audiences? Can they convince people that they're not just a cheap alternative to Tesla, but a real innovator?
That's the real challenge, right? It's not just about like specs and features anymore. It's about building like a brand identity, a story, an experience that connects with people on a different level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something that Tesla's done really well. I mean, they've created this whole culture, community around their brand. They've really tapped into what those like early adopters want, the tech enthusiasts, the people who want a more sustainable lifestyle. So Xiaomi, they're going to have to find their own niche, their own way to connect with a global audience if they really want to, challenge Tesla.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Xiaomi's, their electric ambitions, we're kind of left with more questions than answers, aren't we? Can they actually overcome these hurdles, navigate this, complicated landscape, and become a global force in the EV market?
Time will tell, won't it? I mean, it's a story worth watching, that's for sure. It speaks to the bigger things happening in the world, the shift to a more sustainable future, the rise of these new economic powers, the constant push for innovation. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And we hope this deep dive has given you a new way to look at the EV market, a better understanding of the challenges, the opportunities, and maybe even sparked your own curiosity to learn more.
Absolutely. The future of, transportation, it's being written right now, and we're all part of it.
That's right. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep your eyes on the road ahead.